My name is Annabella. And at 25 years old, while staying in my college dorm, I had a life-changing near-death vision. In this vision, Jesus gently took my hand and pointed to a vast crowd of people, all engrossed in their phones. The glow from the screens was unnaturally bright, almost as if it was pulling in the faces of the people, making them look distant and disconnected. Their necks were unnaturally bent, their heads drooping downward in an almost broken position as they focused intently on their screens. What struck me with terror was what I saw next. Their foreheads were physically sagging under the strain, weighed down by the constant pressure from looking down at their phones. It was as if the very act of bending over their devices had altered their bodies. Their right hands were clenched in tight fists, their muscles twitching and spasming in response to the tension of gripping their phones so hard for so long. The veins in their hands were bulging from the exertion, a clear sign of how deeply their addiction to technology had taken hold of them. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. Jesus pointed to the crowd and, with a deep sadness in his eyes, said, "This is the mark of the beast. It is not something that will come in the future, it is already here. It is being quietly developed before your eyes." His voice was soft, but his words were firm and full of grief. As tears welled up in his eyes, "You have traded your eternal freedom for the fleeting comforts of this world. You have chosen convenience over the true peace that comes from the Father. And you fail to see the chains that bind you, chains that only the Father can break. You have rejected me. And in doing so, you have rejected the one who sent me." He then showed me that the mark of the beast wasn't just about the ability to buy or sell, as many had believed. It was about something far more insidious: control. This mark was how people accessed every aspect of their lives, their money, their food, their transportation, even their homes. It was the key to every transaction, every movement. Without it, there was no way to exist in society. They would be rendered invisible, unable to function, as though they no longer mattered. The mark wasn't just a tool, it was the very means by which they would be controlled, stripped of their autonomy, and reduced to mere puppets in a system that no longer valued their humanity. But what I discovered was even more disturbing. It wasn't just the physical mark that was dangerous. The mark was also deeply spiritual. Jesus, still pointing to the people, said, "By accepting this mark, they are pledging their allegiance to the beast. They are choosing to trade their loyalty to me for the false promise of security, control, and power. But what they do not understand is what they are truly giving up, something far more precious than they could ever imagine." As I listened to his words, I couldn't help but reflect on my own life. Here I am, just 22 years old. And I never imagined I would be sharing something like this on a platform as public as YouTube. But there is a responsibility I feel deep within me to tell this story, regardless of how vulnerable or exposed it makes me feel. I know, without a shadow of a doubt, that Jesus showed me these things for a reason. There is a deeper purpose, even though I may not fully understand it. The truth is, I was clinically dead for several minutes after a sudden medical emergency. During that time, I left this world entirely. I was taken to a place so real, so vivid, that the experience cannot be explained by anything other than a spiritual encounter. It was a realm beyond anything I had ever known, a place that left me with an undeniable sense of divine truth. The reality of it was so profound that words simply fail to convey the depth of what I saw and felt. When I found myself in that place, I came face to face with Jesus. In that moment, there was no doubt in my mind who he was. His presence was overwhelming. filled with both immense love and sorrow. And he showed me something I need to share with all of you. It's about the mark of the beast. We've all heard about it. Whether through church teachings, books, or discussions about the end times. It's the mark mentioned in Revelation, the one that no one can buy or sell without. The one that has become a symbol of the apocalypse. For so long, I thought it was something far off. Something that might happen long after we were gone. It seemed distant. Like a story or warning for a time far beyond our own. But what Jesus revealed to me was shocking. It's not just something that will come in the future. It's already in development. The systems, the technology, the infrastructure, it's already being built. It's here. In the present. Even though most of us are too blind to see it. We are already on the path. And it's unfolding before our eyes. Often unnoticed. As technology rapidly evolves. The foundation for the mark of the beast is not some distant prophecy, it is something we are starting to live with. Piece by piece. Right now. Most people don't realize it yet. But it is already becoming part of the very fabric of our society. When I woke up after that experience, I was overwhelmed by a profound sense of urgency. It wasn't just the intensity of what I had seen, it was the weight of the responsibility I now felt. I couldn't stop crying. But not because of fear. I cried because I knew, deep in my heart, that Jesus had shown me this vision for a reason. He wasn't showing me these things to scare me or to frighten others. He had a purpose. He wanted me to warn those around me. He wanted me to warn you. I understand how easy it is to dismiss something like this. To think it's just another sensational claim or story. But I am not here to make sensational claims. I'm here to share what I saw. To tell you what Jesus spoke to me. And to explain why I believe it is so crucial. Especially now. To stay alert. Vigilant. And firmly rooted in Him. This message is not about fear, it's about awareness. It's about being prepared for what's ahead. About knowing that we have a responsibility to live with purpose and to stay close to Jesus during these challenging times. The world is changing. And I truly believe this vision is part of a larger warning for all of us to remain steadfast. Focused on what really matters. And never to lose sight of Him. No matter what the world throws at us. If you've ever felt deep down that something is wrong with the direction the world is heading. If you've ever wondered about the connection between technology and control, then I urge you to listen closely to what I'm about to say. What Jesus showed me during my experience will shock you. It will make you rethink so many things about the world around you. And it might just change the way you live your life moving forward. I believe, with all my heart, that this is exactly what Jesus wants me to share with you today. This message isn't just for me, it's for all of us. Before all of this happened, I was just like anyone else my age. I wasn't some devout religious person. Nor was I a Bible scholar. I lived like most young people. Distracted by the world. Caught up in the daily grind. Not fully aware of the bigger picture. But everything changed in that moment. And I can't keep what I learned to myself. This is something that could make a difference in how we see the world. How we engage with technology. And most importantly, how we live our lives. It's a wake-up call. And it's a call to return to what truly matters. I believed in God. Yes. But if I'm being honest, my faith wasn't at the center of my life. It wasn't something I prioritized or truly lived by every day. Like most people my age, I was more focused on the things that felt immediate: finishing school, working part-time, and spending time with my friends. Those were the things that took up most of my thoughts and energy. I spent hours online, scrolling through social media, watching TikToks, and getting lost in the endless feed of content. It felt like a constant distraction. Yet I couldn't pull myself away. My phone was practically glued to my hand. An extension of myself. Always within reach. Always pulling me back in. Looking back, it's clear to me now how much time I wasted. How much of my attention was absorbed into the digital world. But at the time, I didn't realize how much it was affecting me. How deeply it was shaping my priorities and my perspective on life. I was caught up in the moment. Just like everyone else. Without a true understanding of what it was leading to. I never took the time to stop and think about just how much of my life revolved around technology. Or how much control it really had over me. It was just part of my daily routine. Something that felt so normal. I didn't even question it. Growing up, I'd hear about things like the mark of the beast, the end times, and all the warnings from scripture during church services. But I always thought it was something far off. Something that didn't apply to me or my generation. I viewed it as a distant concept. Something that was meant to be a warning for people far in the future. Maybe even long after I was gone. It felt like an abstract idea, something to think about, but not really relevant to my life. In my mind, I thought, yeah, it's in the Bible. But it's not something that's going to happen in my lifetime. Right? It just seemed too far-fetched. Too unreal to take seriously. Little did I know. It was already unfolding before our eyes. And I was living right in the middle of it without even realizing. Looking back now, I realized just how blind I was to how much the world is already moving in the direction of what I had always heard about but never truly understood. I was so wrapped up in my daily routine. So absorbed by my phone and the constant flow of information, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I didn't think about how easily we're all being conditioned to depend on these systems. These technologies that are becoming more and more integral to our lives. We're so caught up in the conveniences they offer that we fail to notice how deeply they're shaping us and, more importantly, how much control they're gaining over us. It wasn't until one night that everything changed. That night, everything I thought I knew was turned upside down. The experience I had completely opened my eyes to the reality of what's happening. And it made me realize how crucial it is for us to wake up before it's too late. I was at home, doing what I did most nights, scrolling through my phone, mindlessly tapping through posts and videos, just killing time. But then, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I started feeling strange. Like something was off. It began as a sharp, stabbing pain. I was slipping in and out of consciousness. My vision fading in and out like a broken signal. I remember hearing their voices. Faint but clear. Telling me to hold on. To stay with them. It was the last thing I heard before everything went dark. And then, in an instant, everything went completely dark. But as soon as it did, I felt this strange, unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't like falling asleep, where you simply drift off. This was different. It felt like I was being pulled out of my body. As if something was gently but firmly taking me away from the world I knew. In one moment, I was lying there, helpless, in the ambulance, surrounded by the frantic sounds of the paramedics working to save me. And then, in the next instant, I was somewhere else entirely. The first thing that hit me was the stillness. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brings peace, it was a heavy, almost oppressive quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels alive. As if it's waiting for something to happen. I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was. And that's when I saw it. I was standing in this vast, endless space. It wasn't pitch black. But it wasn't filled with light either. There was a soft, grayish glow that surrounded everything, casting an eerie calm over the scene. There was no sense of time. No reference point to ground me. It was as though I was suspended in a place that existed outside of everything I knew. At first, I felt completely alone. Standing in that vast, unfamiliar space. The silence was suffocating. And I had no idea where I was or what was happening. All I knew was that something was different deep down. I understood that I wasn't on Earth anymore. I wasn't in a place I recognized. And I had no sense of time or direction. Then, in the distance, I saw a figure walking toward me. At first, I couldn't make out who it was. But as they got closer, I felt something, an overwhelming presence. It was as if I could feel the weight of it, even before I could fully see who it was. And then, in that moment, I realized it was Jesus. I can't describe the depth of the moment. When he stood right in front of me, I was completely taken aback. Not by his appearance, but by the sheer power of his presence. There was a peace in his gaze, but also a kind of sorrow that made my heart ache. He didn't say anything at first. There was no immediate greeting or question. He just stood there, looking at me. It was as if his eyes were searching my soul, seeing parts of me that I didn't even understand myself. The silence between us felt eternal, as though everything in that space was paused, waiting for the moment to unfold. In that moment, it felt like he could see every part of me, every thought I'd ever had, every choice I'd ever made, every fear and doubt I'd ever carried. His gaze seemed to pierce through all of my defenses, as if nothing could be hidden from him. It was overwhelming, but also oddly comforting. Like I was being understood on a deeper level than I ever thought possible. Then, he spoke. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, looking at me. And in that silence, it felt like he knew me better than I knew myself. The weight of his gaze felt infinite, like he was looking straight into my soul, understanding every part of me, even the parts one wasn't willing to admit to myself. Finally, he spoke. And when he did, his voice wasn't loud, but it was all-encompassing. It filled the entire space around us, so rich with presence and power that it felt like it could create worlds, but also personal, as if it was spoken just for me. His voice was both gentle and commanding, filled with authority yet tender. He said, "Angela, I have something to show you." Before I could respond, before any words even had the chance to form on my lips, he reached out his hand. There was something about the way he moved, like everything in the universe bent toward him, aligning with his will. The moment my hand touched his, everything around us changed. The space we were in, that heavy, still atmosphere, shifted. It was as if time itself had bent to his touch, and the very fabric of reality was unraveling and reshaping itself before my eyes. The feeling was surreal, like I was being pulled into a new realm of understanding, one that I had never known existed. In an instant, the endless gray space I had been in disappeared, and I found myself standing in the middle of what looked like a massive, sprawling city. The first thing that hit me was how overwhelming everything was. Bright lights flashed everywhere, and enormous digital screens covered every building, displaying constant streams of information. The city was alive, yet there was something unsettling about its vibrancy. It felt futuristic, like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but in a way that made my heart race with unease. The streets were filled with people, but they were all the same, walking around with their heads bent down, completely absorbed in their devices. Some were holding smartphones in their hands, while others wore strange glasses or headsets that completely covered their eyes. It was like a scene from another world, where people were disconnected from everything around them. What struck me the most was the way they moved. There was no engagement with each other, no awareness of their environment. They were entirely consumed by whatever was on their screens. So lost in the virtual world that they seemed to have no connection to reality at all. It felt like they were walking through a digital dream. Their physical bodies moving in the real world. But their minds were somewhere else entirely. Trapped in a screen-based existence. I stood there, watching in silence, feeling the heavy weight of what I was witnessing. This wasn't just a vision of a city, it was a reflection of something much deeper. Something far more troubling. As I took in the scene, I felt a sense of dread settle in my heart. I turned to Jesus. Confusion written all over my face. He looked at me with sorrowful eyes and said, "This is the future that is being prepared for the world." As he spoke, I began noticing something strange about the people around us. On their right hands and foreheads, there was a faint glow, almost like a symbol. At first, I thought it might be a tattoo or a small mark. But as I looked closer, I realized it was far more than that. It wasn't just a symbol, it was something embedded into their skin. It looked like a digital code, almost like a QR code. But it pulsed faintly, as if it were alive, breathing with an energy of its own. I turned back to Jesus, feeling a sense of deep unease, and asked, "What is this?" He remained silent for a moment, his gaze full of sorrow, before he showed me a new scene. A different group of people, their necks bent down, their foreheads sagging, their hands broken just as I had seen before. My heart sank. The image before me was chilling, far more real than I had ever imagined. I had always thought the mark of the beast was something far in the future, something that we wouldn't need to worry about for a long time. But Jesus made it clear, the foundation for it is already being built. The systems, the technology, the infrastructure, it is being created right now. In the very world we live in. Through the devices and systems we rely on every day. Then, he showed me what happened to those who refused to take the mark. I saw a small group of people, scattered throughout the city, who didn't have the mark. They were hiding in the shadows, struggling to survive, disconnected from the digital system that controlled everything. These people couldn't buy food. They couldn't access basic necessities. They were cut off from the world because the entire system had become dependent on the mark. But Jesus looked at them with love, saying, "These are my faithful ones. Though they are rejected by the world, they are written in my book of life." I watched them as they prayed, clinging to their faith despite the hardships they faced. They were tired, hungry, and alone. But there was something different about them, something radiant. A light inside them that couldn't be extinguished, no matter how dark or difficult the world around them became. Jesus turned to me and said, "The world will call them outcasts, but I call them mine. Blessed are those who remain faithful, for great is their reward in heaven." In that moment, the weight of his words hit me hard. I realized just how important it is to stay close to Jesus. No matter how hard the world becomes, no matter how difficult the journey. The systems of the beast may seem powerful, but they are nothing compared to the power of God. As the scene began to fade, the city and its people vanishing from view, I found myself standing in a completely different place, a place that felt cold and mechanical. It was a massive control center, filled with rows upon rows of glowing monitors, flashing lights, and complex machinery. The air hummed with the sterile sound of computers, their screens flickering with streams of data. The people walking around here were different, powerful. They moved with an air of authority, like they were in charge of the entire system. Their faces were calm, too calm. There was no emotion in their expressions, no warmth. They stared at the screens in front of them with a detached focus, as though they were no longer human, just cogs in a massive machine. consumed by the very system they controlled. The whole place felt suffocating, like it was designed to drain the soul. The cold, sterile atmosphere, the relentless hum of technology, and the emotionless faces of those in charge, it all made me feel even more certain of the darkness that had taken root in this world. On those glowing screens, I could see everything: the city, the people, even their every movement. It was like every person who had the mark was being tracked in real time. Their actions monitored as though they were nothing more than data points. I felt a deep, unsettling sense of helplessness as I watched the scenes unfold. Jesus, sensing my confusion, spoke quietly, "This is the heart of the system. It is built to control, to manipulate, and to destroy." As I gazed at the screens, my stomach dropped. The people with the mark weren't just being tracked physically. No, they were being monitored in every sense: emotionally, mentally. Their thoughts, preferences, fears, and desires were all being recorded and analyzed. It was as though their minds were laid bare, like an open book for whoever controlled this system to read and manipulate. I turned to Jesus, unable to shake the dread rising within me, and asked, "What is this?" He said nothing at first. His eyes filled with sorrow. Then, with a quiet but firm voice, he showed me something even darker. Behind the monitors and the controllers, there was a figure in the shadows. At first, it was hard to make out, but as I focused on it, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, its presence absorbing the light around it. It felt suffocating, like the very air around me grew heavier as it drew closer. Then Jesus spoke, and his words were heavy with warning. "This is the dragon. He gives power to the beast. And through this system, he seeks to control and destroy my creation." In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a human system, it was spiritual, rooted in darkness. The people behind it, the ones building and promoting it, thought they were advancing technology for progress and innovation. But they were being used. Unknowingly, the dragon, the enemy, was pulling the strings, orchestrating a plan for complete domination. Jesus looked at me with such intensity, his voice filled with both urgency and love. "The dragon's greatest weapon is deception. He will make this system look like salvation, but it is slavery. Tell them to be vigilant. Tell them to turn to me." I felt the weight of his words, and a deep sadness settled over me. I realized how easily people were being deceived. The system promised convenience, safety, and security, but it came at the cost of their freedom, their souls. And most people didn't even see it. The vision of the control center faded, and I found myself standing once again in that infinite gray space, face to face with Jesus. This time, there was an urgency in his expression, a sense of deep gravity in his eyes as he looked at me. He needed me to understand the weight of everything he had just shown me. He spoke with love and authority, his words etched into my very soul. "Angela, the time is short. The systems of the beast are being built even now. Many are blind to what is happening because they are distracted by the promises of progress and comfort. But you must tell them what you have seen. Warn them to stay vigilant." I asked, with a feeling of desperation, "Lord, how do we resist something so powerful? How do we stand against a system that controls everything?" He smiled gently, and in that moment, I felt a rush of peace wash over me. "The answer is simple: stay close to me. Trust in my word. Do not be afraid, for I have overcome the world." Then, he reminded me of something from the Bible that I hadn't thought about in years. He quoted Revelation 14 verse 12, This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep His commands and remain faithful to Jesus. He looked at me and said, "This is what I ask of my people, to remain faithful. To trust in me, even when the world turns against them." Jesus then warned me about the deception that is coming. The dragon will not appear as a monster. He will disguise himself in light, in innovation, in the promise of a better world. Many will follow him, believing they are doing good, but they will be walking into chains. He showed me how the mark would be presented to the world not as something evil, but as something necessary, even beneficial. It would be tied to health, safety, and morality. People would be told that it was the only way to protect themselves and their families. And because it would seem so reasonable, so logical, many would accept it without question. Jesus said, "The greatest deception is that the mark will not feel like a choice. It will feel like the only option. But remember this, those who trust in me will always have a choice." His words struck me like a thunderclap. And I realized just how easily people could fall into this trap, especially in a world filled with fear and uncertainty. That's why he wanted me to share this message, so people would recognize the deception and choose him instead. Then, as if to lift the weight of what I had seen, Jesus showed me something that filled me with hope. He revealed to me his faithful followers, those who refused to take the mark and remain true to him. They were scattered across the world, few in number, but strong in spirit. Though they were persecuted and rejected by the world, these faithful ones radiated a light that could not be extinguished. No matter how much they suffered or how much the world turned against them, that light inside them remained, steadfast and unshaken. Their spirits were not broken. And in their darkest moments, they glowed with a strength and peace that was beyond anything the world could offer. Jesus, with deep tenderness, looked at me and said, "These are my faithful ones. Though the world rejects them, I will never leave them. Their names are written in my book of life, and their reward is great." In that moment, I understood that their faithfulness and perseverance would be eternally honored. Despite trials and persecution, Jesus would guide and protect them, and their reward in heaven would far surpass anything this world could offer. It reminded me that those who remain faithful to Jesus, even in the hardest times, will receive the greatest reward. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.